This is Grief and Grit, from heartache to high fives with a dash of sass. The podcast that turns the tables on traditional grief talks with a fresh, sassy spin. Listen in for candid conversations about the messy, awkward, and downright hilarious aspects of dealing with loss. Because sometimes the best way to cope is with a little laughter and a lot of grit.
Hi.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Yeah, looking out the window. It's such a beautiful day.
It is. And we're somewhere special. I can't wait to reveal where we are.
We really are somewhere very special. So, everybody, sit back, get your cup of tea, your cup of coffee, whatever it is. Sit back, relax, and welcome to today's episode. So, I'm very excited about what we're going to be speaking about today. And we're going to be dealing with kids' grief and what that looks like and what that means. And it's really the very real grief, but it's often forgotten. It's forgotten in children. Their feelings are kind of pushed aside around grief. You know, we brush them off and say, well, they're young. It's not going to affect them. They hardly knew the person. They're resilient. They're strong. And kids bounce back. But this statement is so not true. Speaking from experience with my own 4 children, I'm sure I speak to a vast majority of you out there listening who have lost someone and have small children. It's so important that we deal with them and that we give them the same space and we get them the same help and we give them the same support as we would to an adult. Grief is internalized. It doesn't matter when you go through grief, it's internalized. And I promise you that if not dealt with, that grief comes up at some point in their growing years, when they're adults, when they're teenagers, the grief comes up bubbles up, rises up, and it comes out in some form. So it's very important that we give them the support that they need. And we thought that this episode was really a good one because on November the 21st is National Kids Grief Day. And today we are very lucky that we are here at Kate's Club. And Greer, I know you know a lot about Kate's Club.
Yes. So Kate's Club is a phenomenal organization here in Georgia that supports children and families who have lost a caregiver or a sibling. And the programming really starts at age 5. So as soon as Jack turned 5, I registered him, and same to Amelie. But we are here today at Kate's Club with Lane Pease, who is the Director of Education and Innovative Programs. And she has her own grief journey that she will share with us. And she has also co-authored the book, We Come Together as One. So Lane, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm really excited.
Or I should say for having us.
Yes.
Yeah, this is a real honor. I mean, as soon as somebody asked me to do a grief podcast with her, I was like, oh my God, I really hope we could interview, someone at Kate's Club one day. And a dream has come true. So thank you.
Oh, I'm just so glad to be here. I'm so glad of the work you're doing around bringing awareness that, people are grieving. It's an event that all of us will go through sometime in our life if we're connected to someone.
Absolutely.
But yet it's not talked about enough.
No, I completely agree. So, if you wouldn't mind, sharing how your experience with grief has shaped your perspective on supporting grieving children and teens.
Yes. So 24 years ago, my first husband died of cancer when my kids were 9 months old. We had been expecting when he was diagnosed with cancer, and we had, when he died, we had a 4-year-old. So we were, just 7 years into marriage, everything going great, building this family that we wanted, and then a devastating diagnosis. And he battled for 16 months, and then again, he died, and I was just sometimes I still, after 24 years, think, was that really happened? Is that really my
Yeah.
life? And so,
Yeah.
I watched my children grow up without their father. About 8-10 years in, I decided to go back to school to become a therapist, to do mental health counseling. Didn't know if I wanted to really do one-on-one or what I wanted to do exactly with it. I was just really aware I wanted to do something. And it led me to intern in hospice because I knew I was comfortable with grief. I didn't go into grad school saying, I'm going to work with children and families in grief. But I knew that was something I was comfortable with. So that path led me to Kate's Club and becoming, at the time, the program director. We were very small at the time. But I knew I brought in, and people had told me through the years, both my personal and then the professional experience has led me to, I think, be very impactful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I couldn't agree more. I think that when you've been through something, it's you connect on a different level than if you're just book smart.
Right.
You were book smart and life smart.
Yeah.
So I think that makes a huge difference.
I often tell families the first night at orientation, when I share a little about myself, I say I had my master's in counseling, and I said before that I got my master's in grief.
Yeah,
and I definitely
right.
feel like that's what I had.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I know that you obviously have seen so many children come through the program and teens and, dealing with that population. What are some of the common ways that you have found that children and teens express or process grief so differently from an adult?
Yeah. So the children look very different, especially younger children when they grieve. They're not going to grieve all at once, kind of like, with us adults, we may cry a lot and take to our bed or really emote or just be numb. Well, children will grieve in smaller doses over a longer period of time, really. So they may look fine. They're playing, and then they'll have grief bursts, where the emotions just come over them. Or the grief comes out in behaviors. So maybe they don't want to sleep alone anymore. It's a really common one.
Yeah.
They have separation anxiety from their caregiver. They maybe don't want to go to school. They have a tummy ache or a headache more often, or complain of those things. They may have trouble getting along with their peers. And one of the things I see is getting upset over little problems. So they're not saying, gee, I miss dad right now. I'm really upset because dad died, but they're fighting with their siblings, or somebody in school says or does something, or maybe just pushes them in the hall on accident and they blow up. Or maybe they're, again, little problems like their pencil breaks and they have a big outburst, whereas they're not saying it's my grief.
Right.
Because most adults aren't very self-aware sometimes.
Right.
So children are not necessarily self-aware to know I'm feeling this way because I'm sad or I'm frustrated. Another thing we see, and especially with teens and children, is anger. So really being quick to anger, and just feeling so angry. And I say a lot of times to teens, I say, anger's easier to feel because it makes us feel strong.
Right.
Sadness
Yeah.
is a vulnerable feeling.
Absolutely.
And a lot of teenagers, especially teenagers, but even just children, they don't want to feel vulnerable. So they go to anger.
It's interesting, Simony, because we recently did an episode on the mask of grief around Halloween, and the anger masking the sadness. Like, that's immediately what I thought of.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that brings me back to the point that I made in the very beginning, was that's why it's so important to support children in their grief and to get them into therapy and play therapy, because those feelings just intensify as they get older and into adulthood.
Right.
So yeah, I think and I think what you're doing at Kate's Club is an amazing start to that journey.
Yeah. Something else that, I hear a lot from professionals as, I'm the mom of
Mhm.
2 kids who lost a parent, um, is that the kids' grief will continue to change as they get older and go through developmental changes.
Right.
Are you able to speak at all to that? How what that might look like?
Sure. I mean, it just makes sense, So if you have an experience at 5, it's going to look a lot different when you're 10.
Mhm.
Your children are changing and developing all the time, so they reprocess that when they have the ability to process it. So we know sometimes the deeply felt loss cannot even be processed till adolescence. So
Mm.
sometimes you're thinking everything's going just great. And this definitely happened with my older child. And, teenage years, whoo, they were
Yeah.
tough.
Okay.
They were tough because that's when, and then you have the heightened, the changes heightened by the physical changes as well.
Right.
But yeah, every new life developmental stage, and then there's new milestones to deal with. These don't stop even through childhood. These go on. A few years ago, I did some research in terms of a survey to people who had experienced the death of a parent or sibling before they were 21. And I sent it out. We have many volunteers here, but I asked people to just share it widely to see, not just how that affected them through their childhood, but how that affected them through adulthood.
Oh, interesting.
Mhm.
Okay.
What we found was more, risk for, especially had most of them did not have support.
Mhm.
And so they're adults now, so they did not have support. And they reported, more issues with relationships and intimacy. They reported more
Mhm.
substance abuse. At some point in their life, the big life triggers were getting married, having children of their own, and reaching the age of that parent that died,
Yes.
reaching that age if they had. So again, it doesn't stop, right? It changes
Mhm.
over time. I usually tell families many times when they first come in and they share, I say, you won't always feel like you feel right now,
Mhm.
but because it does change
It
over
does,
time.
for
Mhm.
sure. Yeah. Um, what are some common misconceptions about childhood grief that you wish more people understood?
Well, I think you mentioned it earlier. People think children are resilient, like they're these
Mhm.
little bouncy balls. And I say often, it's like, why do we expect that? Resiliency is a muscle you build over time after
Mhm.
you've faced adversity. Most children have not faced that adversity yet. So they're not automatically resilient. So they need support. They
Mhm.
can be resilient. I want to make sure we say that. They
Mhm.
become very resilient and very empathetic adults, very,
Mhm.
have a great life after this. But we need to ensure they have support and factors of resilience. So that misconception, because they're playing, because they look like they're fine, or even that teenager who's doing great in school, because a lot of times we do see declining grades, and we know bereavement is the strongest, has the strongest impact on school outcomes across any other adversity,
Oh,
actually.
interesting. Okay.
But I do see teenagers sometimes, especially, become very, very high achieving
Mhm.
Yes.
because they want
Yes.
to not be any trouble, or they throw themselves in school so they
Mhm.
don't have to address any of their grief.
Okay.
So if you look at that child doing that, you think they are just fine. They're okay. So I think that's a misconception, is that kids just bounce back automatically.
Mm.
We know the death of a loved one is the most common form, and yet the most impactful form of adversity for children and adults.
Mm.
So I think that's the biggest misconception, is that they're okay because they don't
Mhm.
look like they do, as like grown-ups.
Right.
Absolutely. And yeah,
My
it's
mind
like,
is blown over this. I have so many thoughts.
yeah, I mean, I've seen I think Greer, well, clearly all three of us at this table
Yeah.
have lived this and seen it. And I know for me, I think in the very beginning, because it became a life of distraction for me, my children were my main distraction. And so you tend to find different ways to distract them. And I think getting them overcommitted to,
See that all the time.
the activities
Yeah.
and, so that no one in the family
Yeah,
has to
yeah.
think about it, no one has to process it. And I think that's something that I, as a parent, had to learn as well,
Mhm.
that I need to process this grief in order to help my children process the grief, and not always successfully.
Right. And I hear that very, very often. As you say that, I'll say, "How are you doing?" And we just try to stay busy. I try to keep them busy.
Yeah.
So when I talk to parents or caregivers, and they think the solution, and frankly, I see it a lot with dads after the
Yes.
death of a mother. That
Right.
we can be in every sport activity under the sun, then
Right.
maybe we'll be okay. And but what that really does sometimes is just exhaust everyone
Mhm.
Absolutely.
and makes it just too much on the whole family. You're trying to do this. Another thing I see is that, we know children learn to grieve kind of how by looking at adults around them.
Mhm.
So
Isn't that the truth?
is it talked about in the family, or does dad say, we're okay, we're fine, nothing's
Right.
wrong, and not show his emotions? And so then, the children get the message that we're not going to show our emotions, right?
They take our lead.
Right.
Yeah.
They do
Yeah.
take our lead, and we've spoken about that in
Mhm.
so many episodes, and I'm to blame for that as well. In the beginning I did, but I didn't know better. And
Right.
so it's so much easier just to mask that grief.
Mhm.
But it's true, it then
Mhm.
becomes a learned thing for the children.
And I'm a verbal processor, and I think I try to overcompensate with the kids to make sure that they do feel comfortable talking about their dad or how they're feeling. And like my son will often say, "Mom, stop," or "enough." And,
Yes.
so I also I think there's definitely, I don't want to call it a happy medium, but I think that there's, definitely
Yeah.
a healthy
Yes.
range. And,
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out what that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Poor guy.
Yeah, I know. I hear that too. So it's either one way
all
or
or none.
another.
Yeah,
Sometimes.
Exactly. But do you see a difference in the children that you work with? Do you see a difference in how they do process it, having a very open home, speaking about it, a parent who shows emotion?
Oh, yes, but also as a parent, you can't keep beating yourself up, because children are just as unique as any individual. Just because they're
Right.
children doesn't mean they're going to act all the same. Some really are more reserved and want to keep it in a little more. Not everyone's a talker.
Right,
Greer
right.
said she is, and
Yeah.
I am too, but not everyone is. And
Right.
many years ago, I was on a panel about teen grief, and somebody I admire very much in the field, and I was a newbie in the field. And he said, children don't have to talk to feel better. And I'm like, oh, really? That's always I'm
That's
pushing
funny.
for.
Yeah.
But there's other ways of
It's true.
expression.
Yeah.
And so I've told our volunteers and our staff at Kate's Club, you don't have to push a child to talk. You offer the opportunity. So you offer that opportunity. Hey, checking in every now and then. But some children may want to do it in more expressive ways, through art or music,
Right.
or they're just processing internally. It doesn't mean they're repressing it necessarily. If you see that they're, doing well otherwise, they may just be more private or reserved people, and that's
Right.
okay. So our rules at Kate's Club is you can pass. You don't have to share. But I've been surprised. Sometimes I see light bulbs go on. I was doing a school group because we work out in the schools too many years ago. And a girl who he didn't say much. Her mother had died. She shared a little, but but she didn't share much. So I didn't know how she was doing. And she came in one day to group and she said, Miss Pease, this group has really been helping me. And I was really surprised. And she said, yesterday was my mother's birthday, and her and her sister had been separated. Her sister went to live with her father, and this girl was living with someone else. And she said, so I was talking to my sister on the phone, And I shared some of the things I had learned in this group. And you just could afford me because she didn't say much in the group.
Yeah.
So, sometimes we're planting seeds and we don't know it.
Right.
Absolutely.
Well, so we're going to have more around how to support the kids specifically, but I'd love for you to share more about Kate's Club. The mission, the programs that you offer. I mean, it is such a jewel in my life. So yes,
Yeah.
please share.
Yeah, so Kate's Club, our mission is to empower children and teens and their families um, and young adults after the death of someone important to them in our clubhouse programs, meaning when the families come to us, we do concentrate on parent, sibling, or a caregiver, someone that was very close to them. Then we do outreach into schools. It could have been the death of anyone important to them in those school groups. And we also support young adults, those 18 to 30-year-olds.
Okay.
And we
Wow.
have people from all
Wow.
over the country join our Zoom calls. We do a Zoom and hybrid program for that.
That's
So
amazing.
we have been around 21 years. Kate Atwood founded us
Yeah.
because her mother had died when she was 12, and she knew she didn't get any support. Her father and her brother and her loved each other very much, but they did not know how to grieve together. And she will say she didn't know any other children who had experienced the death. The people she connected with was like the Disney princesses who had all had parents
Right.
die.
Right.
So, when she was just 23, she started Kate's Club, and it was very small and very local. It was concentrating on doing recreational activities with the kids, just offering them a place to get together. Pretty quickly, she realized they needed more support, so she added support groups, and it's just grown over the 21 years from that. And now we have served thousands of children, both in our
Amazing.
locations, and now we're in different areas of Georgia. We have in-person programming in Atlanta, Noonan, Athens, Albany, and Brunswick now.
incredible.
And we do school
Amazing.
groups all over in different areas of the state.
Wow.
And I think it's so important because grief is isolating.
Mm-hmm.
And, just from here, and I think it's so important to find your grief community. And I applaud you. I mean, that's an amazing thing to not only give support, but to create a community where children, caregivers, teens don't feel isolated. And very interesting that you do have that age group 18 to 30, because I think that's such an impactful age group. That's when, people are starting to settle down,
Right.
create homes, create their own families, and very important to be able to express some of those fears that you spoke about.
Well, we know, and I guess we'll talk about this when we talk about Children's Grief Awareness Day next week, on the 21st too, but it's 1 in 11 children in Georgia will experience the death of a parent or sibling. That's just parent or sibling before they're
Wow.
18. And that rate doubles by 25. So we knew that there was a real gap in services. So 2 years ago is when we started our young adult program called Locate. And you're absolutely right. They're going through so many changes, either college or post college and relationships. And I've talked to 22-year-olds who have inherited homes who, don't know what, like, how am I supposed to deal with this? And so we have some great meetings and great support for those young adults and those that maybe age out of Kate's Club. That's another thing that's unique about Kate's Club is that we are long-term support. So we see children through the years. They may come very regularly to our programs. We're year round at first, and then taper off and just come to our camp once a year. But then they might find they need us, as we talked about it, that changes in their
Yes.
developmental stage. So I had one boy who had joined when he was very young, maybe 7. He came till he was about 10, and he just wanted to do other things on those program days. He wanted to be out playing football or something like that.
Right.
And then one day I see this young man who's much taller than me at a program, and it's him, and he's 16. And I was talking to his mother and said, his mother said, yeah, he's really going through a hard time without his dad now. And he said he wanted to come back to Kate's Club. So we see kids
Yeah.
actually asking to revisit when they need it. And we really believe in that open-ended long-term support for that reason.
And what a safety net for families. Oftentimes I feel like, you have to participate to be a part of something, but just knowing that you can come and go
Yes.
as you need, because that is grief.
Yes.
It comes and
Yeah.
goes.
Yeah.
So,
And we've had families have additional deaths, so maybe dad died and then grandma dies
Right.
a
So
few
it's a
years later.
compounding
And so it is. And then knowing that we're here and they can start coming back or they can continue to come is really important to them.
That's so important. Absolutely. I know that you've had many, many children come through your program. Is there one particular like success story that stands out to you?
Oh, there's so many.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
We had one boy one time who kept his hoodie on for probably the first year he came to programs and didn't say anything. Even, at the beginning of Kate's Club, every clubhouse day or meeting we go around and share our name and who died in our life.
Right.
And he would just share his name. And eventually he shared that his dad died. Eventually I see him one day and his hoodie's pulled off and he's talking and he shares that his dad died by suicide.
Mhm.
Maybe a couple years ago, I'm in the briefing of the day we do before we start our day with the kids, and I see a new volunteer. And he said, Miss Lane, you don't recognize me, do you? And it was him, coming back to volunteer. And I see that more often than you would believe, that they have to remind me who they are because they're all grown up and just
Oh,
adult
wow.
looking. Even if I knew them when they were teenagers, they change so much because many of them wait till, maybe their early 20s
Sure.
to come back and volunteer. So
wow.
that's just one of the many
Oh,
kind
that's
of stories I
amazing.
see.
Yeah,
love that.
that's amazing.
So this is, I'm very curious about this one selfishly. What advice do you give to parents or caregivers who are also grieving, but need to support their children?
Right. Well, I know it's a cliche by now about the oxygen mask, but
Yes.
it's just so true.
Mhm.
It's said again and again for a reason that you have to care for yourself. I've even was talking to two volunteers who had both experienced the death of siblings, as a matter of fact, for a sibling grief training I was doing several years ago. And I said, what do you wish your parents had done or known at the time? And both of them, separate conversations, mind you, said, I wish they had gotten their own help so they could have helped me.
Mm.
And even now, the trajectory, they're in their 20s, 40s, whatever, they're saying, my parents still could have used that help. So I think that's number one, is that you have to get your own support. Another thing we talk a lot about in our parent groups is and parent, I mean grandparents too, and sometimes I have to push them the most to ask for help and to accept help when people give it to you.
We talk,
That's
yeah.
a huge one.
It really
That's a
is.
huge
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
And
Eh,
also in like communities,
Yes.
what would you say to the communities out there, to friends or family, or, dealing with this family who's going through loss?
Right.
What are ways that they can be supported?
To know that grief is not over in a day, a week, a
Right.
month, that are you checking in? Are you still including them? Are you including them in your social worlds? That you're not, oh, well, they don't have a spouse now, so I'm gonna not maybe ask them to come over to this
There's
party. They might feel
Yep.
awkward, or they should have it all together now. And so I think the biggest thing sometimes people do is just forget that they're still going through it, even a year after. Are you checking in with them on those anniversaries, those birthdays, the holidays? Are
Right.
you remembering those things? Say the person's name.
Absolutely.
Don't
Yeah.
act like,
Absolutely.
I have a little cartoon I share sometimes in my trainings, and it's an elephant that's on a therapy couch, and the elephant says, sometimes I feel like people don't even know I'm in the room or something like that, And so I think it's so
That's so
true. The elephant in the room is,
Yeah.
many, especially parents who have experienced the death of a child, they'll say, people just run away from me. They're afraid
Mhm.
and I think it's the same also to the spouse. People think it's catching,
Right. They're
so,
uncomfortable with the
yeah.
uncomfortable. Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Instead of, and you can say the person's name
Yes.
and they're thinking about the person anyway. You might as well ask, or share a memory of the
I was
person.
Yeah.
say
I
that.
mean, I would never
Yes.
tire of hearing 24 years later, I am remarried. You have a wonderful life. I never tire of hearing a story about my kid's dad. And they certainly don't. They want to
Absolutely.
Right.
hear those stories. Um, and so I think that's just so important to keep aware and keep up with the family and keep offering support.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
So, every year, the Thursday before Thanksgiving is National Kids Grief Day. And I'd love to know more about why this is significant and what message you want people to take away from this day.
Yes. So it's significant because I mentioned 1 in 11 children in Georgia, 1 in 12
Mhm.
nationally. In some states, it's as high as 1 in 8. In some
Wow.
areas of Georgia, it's high as 1 in 8.
It's heartbreaking.
So you're going to, that's 2 in every classroom, 2 children, if you think about it. So it was started to just bring recognition to this subject. And, we're a member of the National Alliance for Children's Grief, and their motto is "No child should grieve alone." And so
Mhm.
it's really to bring awareness to this as an issue and to know that children need support and they need long-term support.
Absolutely.
What can the general public do to better support grieving children in their communities?
I think a little about what we talked about, just being aware.
Mhm.
If you're working with children, especially, Kate's Club provides education for any youth development um, professionals, including those in the school. We can come out and we can educate you how to support a child in the school. They spend so much time in school, right?
Right.
Um, and, there's policies that we can all think about. Is your company have a healthy bereavement policy? I mean, that helps
they
the whole
should.
family, and they
Every
should,
company
but many
should.
times they don't.
Right.
You
It's
know,
holistic to the entire
it's
family.
there's just
Yes.
so much, or making sure people know about Social Security benefits,
Right.
especially if
Yeah.
a grandparent sometimes gets, custody. They don't know of all the benefits they may
Right.
be
Mhm.
eligible for. So
Mhm.
just kind of awareness around those and making it our vision is a world in which it's okay to grieve. So
Right.
I think that just takes the whole community. That takes everyone. That takes national policy. It takes local policy, and it just takes people being kind and empathetic as
Yeah.
well.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And do you have specific resources, activities, books that you would recommend for families going, navigating this crazy, crazy grief? And I feel
Yeah.
like it's something that could even be for schools, like,
Yes.
as you said,
Yeah.
that's like 2 children per classroom that have gone through a loss. There should be more resources
Yeah.
in the school system.
Well, I would urge you to go to Kate's Club website at www.katesclub.org. We have a list of resources. We have a toolkit there where you can see books and other, developmental responses to death. Some of the children's books I love is When Dinosaurs Die by Mark Brown. It talks about just explaining death to children. There's one Always and Forever. I mean, they're all listed on our book website. I really would urge parents and just, we come together as one, helping families share, grieve, and heal. It's based on all the work we've done at Kate's Club. Nancy Kreisman and I wrote it in 2020 and 2021, and all proceeds go to Kate's Club. It's found on Amazon. So, we give all new families a copy of that book too, because it's just a guide to help you and your child through grief.
Mhm.
So those are just some of the places I would say visit or
Right.
resources.
And how can people get involved in supporting Kate's Club?
Mhm.
Especially with National Kids Grief Day coming up.
Yeah.
What are some of the ways that our listeners and people out there can help support Kate's Club? Because you're doing such amazing, necessary work.
Yeah,
Truly,
I would
yeah.
love for you to go to our website again at www.katesclub.org, and you can see how to get involved, whether your family needs resources, whether you're a professional who would like trainings or a school group, or if you would like to donate. We do not charge our families or our young adults
Right.
for any of our programs.
It's amazing.
We don't charge schools for school groups.
Mm.
So, we do rely on donations. And so we would love for you to go do that. You might want to adopt a meal. You want to, on family nights, it's something we have where the whole family comes in once a month. Maybe your organization, your synagogue, your Sunday school class, whatever, would like to adopt a meal and come in and serve it to our families. We love partnerships like that. So we'd
Right.
love for you to reach out and find out more information with that.
Amazing. So last question before we close. How can people support kids, especially gearing up to the holidays? And the holidays are such a difficult time of year for anyone who's
Yes.
grieving.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
So what are some specific things we can do to support those children and teens grieving?
I think, one of the important things to do is talk ahead of time.
Mhm.
So let's not wait till the day before Thanksgiving or when Hanukkah or Christmas starts. Let's talk ahead of time. It's like, what will the holidays look like this year?
Mhm.
Sometimes family members, it can get a little tricky because they have different ideas. I begged my kids to just go on a cruise every year.
Mm.
Like anything, don't make me do
Just
the
escape, yeah.
holidays. But they were young and they were like, well, but no, we
Right.
don't want that. Now they would love that in their
Yes.
20s. But then they did not, they were not on board. So I just, I stuffed it and I did what I did, to try to make it as good for them. It was hard. It was
Mhm.
extremely hard. So talking ahead of time, what are we going to do the same traditions or we want to do something different? At Thanksgiving, I think it's a wonderful time for people to go around and maybe share a favorite memory of the person who died. And so as we talk about, we usually go around our table and say something we're thankful for. So let's also say what we were thankful for about that person.
Mhm.
If you celebrate Christmas, we talk about whether you hang that person's stocking. Well, one idea is to hang the stocking and put memories of the person that we
Oh,
open and share, or
Oh,
donate for Christmas or Hanukkah. If there was something that person really, say they loved animals and they were really into pets, so can we buy some things to donate? Instead of buying them a present, we buy it for the local animal shelter. So thinking about how we make that significant. Are we going to cook their favorite food or
love
cook the
that.
food? I always go back to some of my mother's recipes and that food connection of like, yes, this is my mother's dressing, that makes us feel close to those people too.
I love those.
Yeah, those
Those
are
are-
really fantastic.
Gosh,
Yeah.
I needed you 16 years ago.
I needed me 24 years ago.
Well,
For
thank
anyone
God,
listening,
yeah.
take heed of everything that you've heard today.
Yes.
Trust me, these are more than helpful. And,
Absolutely.
so
Yeah.
thank you for
Thank you,
bringing
Lane.
this to the community.
You're so
Really,
welcome.
yeah.
And thank you for doing this podcast. We will share it with our families. And I know they'll be
you.
so grateful to have it too.
Amazing.
Thank you so much.
Well, everyone, in case you forgot, it is katesclub.org. So please go on, learn more about it. Please, find ways to support this incredible organization and become a part of it. For us, we can be found on any place where you find podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and so on, and also at griefandgritpodcast.com. We hope you all have a very peaceful Thanksgiving and that you're
Absolutely.
able to create some new memories, and that again they bring peace and comfort.
And to embrace the old is also,
Yes.
connecting the old and the new
Mhm.
is the right way to go, and it
Love
does
that.
bring comfort.
Yeah.
So sending love to all of you and
Yes.
comfort and strength, and we'll be back.
Yes, we will.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. If you love what you heard, please follow Grief and Grit and share our podcast with your friends and family.